am Kat Bailey, and I am here to share my background story behind leaving Mormonism and finding Christianity. I was raised in an extremely LDS family. We had, and I don't say this to brag, but I was raised in a family who is extremely active. My grandparents were extremely active. My great-grandparents were extremely active. We had pioneer heritage blood that traced all the way back to Joseph Smith. We were in it for lifetimes. I was, at one point, I was a Laurel's president, which is the 16 to 18-year-old women's ministry. And I was the class president for that. At the same time, my dad worked in the bishopric, which is the congregation leaders. And so we were very, very involved my entire life. Even as an adult, for quite some time, I was still involved in the LDS Church. I married a returned missionary and got sealed in the temple. No, that's not true. But wound up in a really messy divorce. My change out of Mormonism started when I was 25. The man that I had married in the temple, who's supposed to be this worthy upholding priesthood holder, was extremely emotionally and at times physically abusive. And it escalated to where he was physically abusive inside the walls of the LDS Church. He had determined that I was cheating on him. It was not true. It was unfounded, and he confessed it himself that he couldn't prove that I was cheating on him, but he knew I was. And when he couldn't, the frustrations got the better of him, and he physically assaulted me in a Sunday school room at an LDS church, leaving our 3-year-old unattended in the chapel at the time. He then called the bishop out of sacrament meeting and asked the bishop to speak with me personally about the situation. And I asked the bishop for resources and help to get out of the situation. And the bishop proceeded to ask me what I was doing to provoke the argument in the first place. So I left using my own devices and figuring out what I needed to do to get out of this relationship. I got a protective order. I served him with the protective order. I left the state while I was waiting for the protective order to be served. He violated the protective order and spent 10 days in jail. During that time, and after that time, my daughter and I spent many nights in hotel rooms, shelters, friends' houses, and we were just trying to stay under the radar because the apartment that we had at the time was the one that I shared with him, and the apartment complex would not change the locks. So we didn't feel safe to go to our apartment. I didn't feel it was safe to stay at my grandparents' house because he knew where they lived as well, so we had to stay under the radar for quite some time. Just as that was starting to settle out, when in June, I had just left him, and then it was about
June of
2015, 2015. So I had left him around the beginning of June. It was starting to settle out while he was in jail, and I got a phone call from my dad that my grandfather, who had previously had a heart transplant, was in septic shock, and he was not expected to make it through the night. So we went up to the hospital, and sure enough, he did pass away the next day. 3 weeks after that, I got a phone call from my stepmom telling me that my dad had also passed away from suicide. So my world at 25 felt very, very, very much alone. I felt I didn't have time to mourn any of these 3 things that died. My marriage had died, my grandfather had died, and now my dad had died, and it all happened within 3 months. And I turned to the church because that's what we were told to do. Turn to your bishop, trust your church leaders, pray, ask the missionaries for help, or visiting teachers, or whoever. And I turned to the church, and they said, well, we need you to come back to church. You should attend church. And I was like, this is the same church that he hit me in, that he pushed me into a chalkboard. And grabbed me, and I was like, I can't go back there. And earlier, the controversy was that they wouldn't let me go to a singles ward because I had a child, even though the child was never with me on a weekend. So I didn't need childcare during a singles ward. I would understand if that was a problem since I don't have a nursery. But that wasn't the case. And they wouldn't let me switch buildings. And so as a result, I'm not proud of it. I did reach a point in my life where I was being told I wasn't doing enough for God. And as a single mom who's mourning 2 deaths within 2 months and not even being able to be in her own home, I didn't have anything to give to God. I didn't have a church to go to because I didn't feel safe in it. I didn't have a home because I didn't feel safe in it. I was at my widow's mite. I had nothing. And I was being told that nothing wasn't enough. And it hurt a lot. It hurt a lot. And so God and I came to a very one-sided understanding that if he didn't care, neither did I. And so I stopped caring, and I started doing dumb things that I knew would, especially in Mormonism, piss God off a little bit. So to try to get his attention, I started drinking and sleeping around and not making smart decisions. And one night I was laying on my sofa watching, I don't even remember what it was, some stupid game show, Who's Line or Family Feud, something. And it was almost as if he was standing behind the sofa, and he said, "You're done playing around. It's time to come home." And I thought that meant that I was going to black out and die that night. But I woke up the next morning and realized that that wasn't the case. And I was like, well, then what does come home mean? And come home at the time, in my misunderstanding of what that meant, was I was supposed to go back to the Mormon church. And by then I was a little more okay with it because by then I had also moved. So I was no longer in the same building. I was no longer under the same bishop. I was with new people. And I was okay with that. And things were fine. I went to church. I held 3 church callings at one point, and it was good. It was really good. But as I started to, one of my callings was primary. And they released the Come Follow Me curriculum, which was the curriculum where you could explore, the manual wasn't scripted anymore. Beforehand, the manual was very much like, here's an example, draw this on the chalkboard, show this picture, ask this question. It was no longer like that. It gave you some scriptures, it gave you a little paragraph summary, and have fun, do your thing. Here's some resources you can use. And I loved it. I ate it up. But the more that I started studying these resources, and the more that I started studying these lessons, I was also, during the Come Follow Me curriculum, you're also supposed to be discussing this as a family. And I was remarried to another person, not Drew, and he was not an active member. So I was kind of the single mom taking my kids into the fold, trying to teach them the truth of the gospel. And so I was preparing those lessons. I was preparing my primary lessons. I was preparing, I homeschooled them at the same time, so their homeschool lessons, and trying to figure out all of these activities. And the more time that I spent in the gospel, the less it started to make sense. And at the time, I couldn't quite put a finger on what didn't make sense, but there were just things that subconsciously, it just didn't line up for quite some time. And we were living with Mike's parents at the time, and then we moved into our own apartment. And the day that we stepped foot into our own apartment, I told him, I don't want to step foot in a Mormon church for a little while. At least for a little while. I need some time. I need some clarity. and I need to just figure all this out. And so I spent time only in the Bible. And I didn't go to pastors. I didn't go to preachers. I didn't go to YouTube. I didn't use Google. I didn't use anything. It was me, God, and a journal. And that was it for about a year. And as I started to read through the Bible and started to journal, I started writing down all of the questions that I had. Anything that didn't make sense. And I felt comfortable challenging God a little bit, respectfully, but still challenging God and saying, why is this the case if prophetic revelation from the LDS faith says this? Why is this not line up? And the answer I pretty much got from God was, great question. And that was not helpful. It was a little frustrating because Jesus would say things like in Matthew, Jesus says that it's not what enters into your body through your mouth that matters, it's what's in your heart. So why is the word of wisdom so important? And God's answer was, great question. And that was a little frustrating. But I also, after I finished the Bible, then I started asking missionaries and bishops and pastors and preachers and rabbis. I went everywhere with my journal and I said, help me understand. Help me understand this. And the bishops and the missionaries had nothing. A lot of the answers from the bishops and the missionaries were, just pray about it. And I'm like, what do you mean? What do you think I've been doing? This is a prayer journal. This is all I've been doing for a year. And the general answer I got was, you'll know eventually. I'm like, well, time's up because I need answers like pretty quick. And so this period of confusion went on for quite some time, and it was an Easter Sunday. And every 6 months, the Mormon Church does a thing called General Conference. I know that Rob is extremely familiar with General Conference. He's there all the time. This one happened to fall on an Easter Sunday. This was April of 2019. This was right before I had my son. And my daughter came up to me and said, okay, I'm ready for church. And they always got a little Easter basket, and it had like a stuffed animal, a movie, a couple of treats, and a dress. Or a new outfit, since I had a son at that point too. And she'd put on her dress, she had her hair done, she was all ready, she looked adorable. And she's, I'm ready for church. And I said, sweetie, we don't have church today. And she's like, what? And I said, we don't have church today, it's General Conference. And the look and the emotion that came behind her voice, I will never be able to recreate. But she looked at me and just said 3 simple words that just hit me. She said, Mom, it's Easter. And that's when it hit me. It's important at this time for my 5-year-old to go into a brick and mortar building on a Sunday. And I guess she was 7 at the time. Yeah, she was 7. And so I was like, well, we're in Utah. Christians are scary. Where do you propose we go? We don't have anywhere. All the churches are closed. And she said, I had that friend at school. She sang in choir with this little girl. She said, we could go to her church because it was right next door to the school and we lived right behind it. I look it up and their service happens to be 20 minutes later. She's already dressed and that's half of my morning routine. Apparently Christians can wear jeans. I just need to throw on not pajamas and we can go. And we'll roll out. It's fine. So we went, and I was very relieved to find out that I was right about the jeans thing because I was definitely not Easter Sunday pretty. And we walked in. I did not know that this friend of hers happened to be the pastor's daughter. I found that out very quickly when the man sitting next to her got up and started preaching. And he came up to me after church and he was like, hi, it's so nice to meet you. I had previously met the mom during choir performances. And he said, do you have any questions? And I was like, yeah, I do, as a matter of fact. And he would start to answer my questions, and I said, I need to see where in the Bible this says. Because I would get answers from other preachers and pastors and things, but they were speculation, mostly. Most of the time they weren't ready with the Bible. And he was just flipping back and forth, ready to go with all of my answers. And I was like, did you read this before I got here? It's like, how did you find a copy? Because this is the only one I have. But he was ready, and he had all of the answers. And then he invited me to the women's Bible study. And the women's Bible study happened to be studying James, which is the very scripture that Joseph Smith read when he had the first vision. So I thought I was an expert. I thought I was ready off of one verse, and I got a wake-up call. And I started asking questions, and I started getting comfortable challenging God a little bit and asking other like-minded Christians. And I thought that I would get the same answers that I did in Mormonism. And I didn't. And I was surprised by that. I asked at one point, do we have a church-approved map that I can look at? I wish that I had a map so I could see where all of this was happening. She said, you can just look it up on Google. I was like, we can use Google? And I was so surprised because in the Mormon faith, they tell you don't use Google. The internet lies. All resources are not, credible. And so I was very surprised that I was allowed to use Google. And that was kind of my first little bit of like, I have some freedom now. I can use Google. Like that was my little rebel moment for a second. I got excited because I could use Google. And I didn't know that that was a thing when I was doing my prayer journal, because it wasn't allowed before. And so I asked all my questions, and I got answers to all of my questions. But I still wasn't quite ready to trust God, because growing up, especially those 3 months, God didn't seem like he was really there at that point. And it took me a while to realize that maybe I just wasn't listening, or maybe I didn't like the answers I was getting. And so I started attending the women's Bible study and started asking more questions and started really getting involved with our church. And then another surprising thing happened that I never thought would happen. I got my second divorce in May of 2020. Never saw it coming. He just decided that we weren't going to live together anymore. And he left. And he left me with 2 kids. 3 kids at that point. 2 that were his. And it was hard. So again, I was back to the single mom in an apartment. I knew how to change locks on my own this time. So I changed the locks the night he left. But I felt safe. And that was what I needed. I needed that safety for a little bit. And the day that he left, I just sobbed. But I felt God telling me it's going to be okay, because there's somebody else out there who's praying for you right this minute. And then 3 months later, I can't look at you. And then 3 months later, COVID broke out, and we had the earthquake that hit, and then a windstorm. And I had been previously I was on a Christian dating app, but it was mostly because I didn't have really Christian friends. And the church that I had previously been going to rejected the idea that I was filing for divorce when he had left. And so I was kind of turned away from that church a little bit. And so I was kind of alone again for a little while. And so I was going through the Christian app, and it was mostly, I wasn't even really going on dates. It was kind of like, I don't have my kids this Friday. You want to go bowling? It was super casual. I wasn't ready for anything because I was still going through a divorce. But I needed that fellowship. And then I got a message that said, "How's the weather?" And I was like, is this man really so socially inept that he can't think of a better way to start a conversation than, "How's the weather?" But because we were having Category 2 hurricane force winds at the time, I commented back a very sarcastic, "It's a bit breezy." And he said, "In all seriousness, are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, we're good." And he's like, "Are you okay, or are you like, you think you're okay?" And I said, "Well, we still have power right now, and I'm just running blankets through the dryer to keep my kids warm because the swamp cooler, the cover is blown off and now the wind's coming through." And he said, "Well, why don't you come and just stay at my apartment? No commitment, nothing crazy, but, you know, just so you have somewhere safe to stay. If you need to come and stay at the apartment until your power, you know, everything's settled down, then I'll come get you." And I was like, no, I'm not jumping into anything like that again. And he said, "Okay." And he just kept asking through the night, "Are you okay? Are you sure okay? Do you still have power? How warm's your house?" And I finally gave in. I was like, "If my power goes out, I will give you my address." And just like that, the power shut off. So I text my address over, and he's headed out. So we stayed at his apartment until our power came back on, and I kept feeling the need to explain myself to him because of what I grew up with, of being under a priesthood holder. And I said, you know, like, I do want to go back to my apartment at some point. And he was like, you have your own car. You can go back and forth whenever you want. And over those couple of days, as we were trying to get my house reestablished and catch laundry back up and get my house cleaned back up and reorganized from this divorce and trying to keep up on 3 kids, we started talking a lot. And he asked me, "Are you a Christian?" And I said, kind of, like, I believe in God, but I've not really, like, committed to anything. And I said, I grew up Mormon. And he goes, "Oh boy." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what about you? What did you grow up in?" And he's like, "Well, I'm a Christian." And I was like, "So is everybody else in Utah." And he said, "No, I grew up Pentecostal." And I was like, "You're a doomsday prepper that speaks in tongues, huh?" And he was like, "Not exactly." But we started communicating back and forth. He would give me the Christian perspective, and I would give him the Mormon perspective, and we would kind of politely but banter back and forth a little bit. And I got frustrated and said, "It can't be this easy." And he's like, "Why not? Why can't it be that easy?" I said, it just can't. It can't just be that simple." He's like, "But it is." And that really struck me. And it wasn't too long into all of this, too, that I spoke with another pastor, and we were just speaking I don't even remember what we were talking about. But I clung so tightly to what the Bible said that this simple statement broke my entire shelf with Mormonism. He said, "You know that the Bible doesn't talk about a great apostasy, right?" And that took the floor out of everything I had left in Mormonism. And that was a hard truth. That was the hard truth that broke everything for me. And I didn't realize that more hard truths were coming because I learned what a sinner was. And I'm not a sinner. I don't really, I've not stolen anything. I've paid my tithing when I grew up. I'm not a sinner. And I was offended when somebody called me a sinner. I was like, I am not. I am a good person. And
right.
I learned real quick. I read Exodus, and I was like, I'm a horrible person. I made it through Genesis, and I was like, I'm a really bad person. This is not good. And then I started to try to figure out, okay, if this is human nature and if this is what the fall did, how do I fix this? And the answer is you can't. You can't fix it. But what you can do is you can trust me and believe in me. And I was like, I don't know about that. And I struggled with that because I grew up with a stepdad who was around loves my mom, but would back up everything mom did, whether or not he agreed with it. And I grew up with a father who, for 7.5 years of my childhood, spent time in prison and then committed suicide. So I didn't really have that father figure. My ex-husband was abusive, and the other one packed up and shipped out one night. I didn't really have a platform to trust men in general. And so that was hard for me. And after a while, I finally decided I'm not even sure if this is the right thing to do. I'm not even sure if this is how the right way that Christians do this, but I think it was Easter that you bought me a cross necklace.
Probably the cross that
And
like your birthstone or something.
yeah, and I said, I'm not sure if this is the right way to do this. I'm not sure if this is how Christians commit their life to God. But I put on the cross necklace and I said, I don't know where we're going with this, but I don't really have anywhere else to turn. So let's give it a try.
I think it's the one.
And no, this one my mom gave me for her wedding. And you know, God kind of did the little, a little bit of excitement, and I still had questions, I still had some reservations, but then eventually, the more I started to study the Bible, the more I was really starting to get angry with what I learned in Mormonism, and the more I really started to see why it was wrong and why I couldn't agree with the doctrine. And so I told Drew one day, I need to write a letter. And he said, okay, to who? And I said, I need to write a letter to the Mormon church. And he was like, what does that do? And I said, it removes my name off of their records. He's like, you have to write a letter for that? And I said, yeah, you do. And I didn't go through Quit Mormon. I typed up the letter and I scheduled an appointment with the bishop and I said, we need to talk. And I went into the bishop's office and I set the letter down and I said, I don't want to argue. I don't want to go rounds with the Bible. I don't want missionaries at my door. I am letting you know that this is my letter of resignation. I want out, and I'm giving the church 30 days to let me know that I am off the records. And if you don't have it off the records, I am prepared with an attorney and to get the media involved to let them know that I'm being held hostage in a church I don't want to be part of anymore. And I got my letter 2 weeks later. So if you're sitting in Quit Mormon, there's your how-to. So I got my letter 2 weeks later. And then I woke up one morning and I told him, I said, if I've already been baptized in the Mormon church, can I get baptized again? And he was like, yeah, when do you want to do it? I'll help you sign up. He was ready. And he took me to a Christian church, and I walked in and I was like, where are we? There's a band and there's lights and fog, and I was like, where are we? What is this? And I thought he set me up. I was like, this is a concert. And he's like, no, not quite. But we started going to his church for a couple of weeks, and I kind of got the feel of it. And then a couple months later, I told the pastor, I said, I don't know if I want to be a member of this church, but I know I want to be baptized. And he was like, cool, we're doing baptisms in 2 weeks. Here's the paperwork. And they were ready to go. And so I got baptized. And the day I got baptized was the day I started to see what the Spirit really does feel like. In the Mormon church, they always tell you, oh, the Spirit was so strong here, and the Spirit was strong. And I'm like, we're in Walmart. I never understood how other people would be able to feel the Spirit, and I started to get this idea that I wasn't worthy of feeling the Spirit as a Mormon, because my grandma would be, oh, it was such a special moment, and we saw this, and it was so spiritual, and I was like, we're in the middle of the grocery store. I don't understand where you felt the Spirit in Walmart. And when I got out of the water, I just got this feeling that any parent has felt before. That first time that you set eyes on your child and you're like, I have so many plans for you. I have so many things that I want you to do. And I want you to be a lawyer and a doctor and this and that. And I want you to do all these great and amazing things. I felt all of that at once, and I was just like, And I started to cry for the first time, and I really felt the Spirit that day. And that was the first time that I honestly felt the Spirit. And God did have some interesting plans for me. Since then, He has talked me into, conned me. I don't know how to put this. I'm writing a book about my journey out of Mormonism and into Christianity. I'm also building a ministry off of teaching Mormons biblical Christianity, but also teaching Christians how to talk to Mormons from a Mormon perspective. So Drew gives the biblical perspective and I give the Mormon perspective in our ministry. It doesn't have a name yet, nor a website, but I will update as I have that. I also went to nursing school. That was not ever an intention, but I went to nursing school and I kept passing the tests, and anyone in here who is a nurse knows those tests are not easy. All the answers are right, but you have to find the one or the ones that are most right, and it could be any, all, or none of them at times, and they're hard. And I knew a little bit about medical things, but it was never a passion of mine. But then I went to nursing school, and I learned that I was created to be a nurse and an ex-Mormon Christian who teaches ex-Mormons about Christianity and teach Christians about Mormon doctrine so that they can teach other Mormons who are trying to leave. And so it was through God that I found my purpose in life that I was looking for a very long time. So.
Okay, thank you. Questions?
When did you guys get married?
We got married March 5th of 2022.
Is he the one that had the apartment?
Yes, he was the one that took me to his apartment during the windstorm.
Okay.
I'm the one that bailed her out.
So, yep, he was the one I found on the Christian dating. I wasn't even, it was sort of like Christian Tinder. So it was one of those like swipe, and if you guys like each other, then you can chat, and if not, then you just don't match up with each other. I wasn't even going to match with him. But my oldest was laying next to me, and she was like, oh, he's cool. And I was like, he looks exactly like your dad. And she's like, yeah, you have a type. All of them look like my dad. I was like, no, we're not doing that. And she says, but Mom, you said you wanted somebody with a stable job, because my ex-husband left jobs like every year. And so I was like, if I ever get married again, I want somebody with a stable job. And she's like, he has a badge on his dash. You can't get much more stable than a cop. I was like, that's fair. So I was like, you know what? I'll match. Let's see what happens. And then he saw the notification in his email like 2 weeks later and opened it up. And that's how we met. So
what draw is Drew, is it?
Yes, sir.
Drew, what drew you to her?
That's a great question. I guess my biggest answer was I ended up getting some extra disability pay after I got out of the military, and I had put some of it to the side, and I knew at some point in time there was going to be a chance that I was going to need it. I didn't know exactly for what. I just knew I was going to need it. And that's kind of what the Spirit kind of told me, and to put it to the savings. And I was financially fine when I text Kat back. I looked at her profile first, and I thought she was beautiful. I thought it was somebody that I could share a connection with. On a friendly basis, go to movies, go bowling, because we kind of shared the same things that we like to do. I wasn't looking for a serious relationship. I just got out of being married for over 16 years to my first wife, and I really wasn't looking for anything serious. I just wanted to have a friend, to go to the movies, to go bowling, to go to dinner, and call call it quits because I'm originally from Texas, and all my family and friends are back in Texas. The only thing I have here that was holding me here was my daughter. Other than that, that's it. I had no other business to be here in Utah, but instead of moving back to Texas, I decided to stay here and raise my daughter. I knew what it was like growing up without a dad, and I didn't want to leave my daughter the same way.
Good.
So I ended up messaging her. Something just told me that I needed to reach out to her, and so I did. I didn't hear anything back, like for after a few days, so I deleted the app. About a week later, I opened up my email and I noticed I had a notification from this app that I had deleted, and I was like, okay, well, all right, I'll re-download it and open it up, and it was her. And that's when I was like, okay, she's got to be a scam artist. So that's why I sent the message about the windstorm. How's the weather?
The weather is because I wanted to make sure I was in Utah.
And that gave me the clarification I needed to see that she was here in Utah. And after going and getting her, bringing her back, and then we got, as we started becoming friends and hanging out more, she was going through a very hard time financially. Hard time with when I go to her place, she barely had anything. She was running low on diapers. It was coming close to her birthday, and I wanted to take her and her kids and my daughter out to dinner, and her daughter came out wearing this crop top and these Daisy Duke shorts, which to me as a 9-year-old is very inappropriate to wear out in public. And I said, you need to go put on something different because it looked like PJs to me when I came over to pick them up in the morning. And she's like, this is all I have. I looked over at Kat. I go, what does she mean this is all she has? And she goes, I'm doing the best I can. I'm a single mom. I can't afford a babysitter. I can't afford certain things. And I felt overwhelmed, understanding what she was going through. And so she ended up borrowing her daughter ended up borrowing some of her clothes. We went to Applebee's, I think, to eat, and her daughter looked over at me and she's starting to cry again. And I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, this is the first time we've gone out and actually sat down and got to eat at a restaurant. And I go, well, there's all kinds of restaurants. What do you mean sit down? She goes, usually mom's only able to take us to McDonald's. And I said, okay. And I had asked Kat, what do you want to go do for your birthday? And she's like, I don't know, not really. But as we were getting ready to sit there and eat, she saw the prices on the menu, and she's like, me and my kids will eat back at the house. I don't want to cost you anything. And I said, don't worry about it, I got it. And she's like, are you sure? I said, yes, I'm sure. I got you. So paid for it, all that stuff. Kids had a blast. We ended up getting desserts. It was an amazing time. And my daughter got to know her kids, and they all became best friends. And
they've clicked since day one.
So after that, I asked Kat, what do you want to go do for your birthday? You want to go to the movies? You want to go bowling? And she's like, nothing really, but you can take us back, and you can take me and my kids back, and you and Casey can go do whatever. I go, I'm here to celebrate your birthday, not for me to go with my daughter to celebrate your birthday. We're here celebrating your birthday. And something came over me to the point that I was in tears. And the money that I had put to the side was several thousands of dollars. And I felt this hand that said, take them to the store. Have fun. So I was like, I know what we're doing. And she goes, what? I go, if I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise. So I took her and her kids and my daughter and me, and we went to Walmart. We filled up 3 baskets of stuff. Diapers, groceries, clothes, new clothes for all of our kids. Me and my daughter got a few things. We didn't really need anything, and I didn't want it to be all about us. I ended up spending over $3,000 that day. I ended up getting notification from my bank asking if this was true or not. And I'm like, yes, just prove it, yes. And her comment back to me was, are you sure? And I said, I am sure. I want to help you. And she goes, I'll figure out a way to pay you back. It's like, I don't want the money back. And she goes, but why? I go, why not? My parents, growing up in the South, there's one thing that you'll learn down there, is that if you see somebody that needs a need, you step in and help. That's almost always guaranteed. That's what my parents taught me, is that if you see someone that needs help, you help. You don't ask for anything in return. You just do it. And so I did. And she goes, are you sure? And I said, yes. And she goes, well, I don't know how I'll pay you back. I was like, I don't want the money back. I don't need it.
So I bought him a $1,500 ring.
And so
I'm halfway there.
So after that, she was just overwhelmed in tears. Her daughter's feeling more comfortable in clothes that actually could fit her. Her boys have clothes that they could fit into. And she goes, I go, and the next thing was, after that, I said, do you want to go on a date? And she's like, I don't know. And I was like, okay. And she actually eventually agreed to it, to go on a date with me.
Carter's sister told me to.
And after that, it was just, we've had our ups and downs. We've had our debacles between her coming from 30 years of Mormonism to me being Christian. For instance, she would call me from work one day and she asked me if she could go buy her a Dr. Pepper.
At a job where I was making more than he was.
And I said, what do you mean, can you go buy you a Dr. Pepper? You got a vending machine, don't you? You got a debit card, right? Yeah. So go buy you a Dr. Pepper.
We finally had to have a conversation with how much money I'm allowed to spend without his permission. And he said $20. And I take full advantage of that now. Anytime that something is less than $20, I'm like, I can go buy this. And he's like, no. Why was less than $20? We never talked about what that was for. I just said I needed to know.
The thing I told her mostly was that, if you end up buying something that we need, just let me know so I can put it in the budget. Other than that, I don't need you for me to give you my permission to go buy something. And that was a hard thing for her to get used to. And then as things kept going, like when she asked me what religion I was, and I said, Pentecostal, and I asked her, and she said, oh, at first I say, and that's the issue with some of you people like that. And she goes, what do you mean? I go, you judge first before you get to know the person. And
I was always told Christians are scary.
And so I go, you judge before you do that. And she goes, well, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She goes, in the Mormon faith, they believe that you have to do all kinds of great works in order to get to heaven. And she goes, what is your stance on that? And I said, well, I go based off of John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. I go in there, it doesn't say you have to do 1,000,000 great works to get to heaven.
He said, believe in him and what? And I said, it doesn't say anything else. He says, exactly. And that's where it can't be that simple. He's like, it is that simple. It says it right there.
And here's something to, and I don't want to be a beggar of bad news or anything, but I brought this up to her, was that if Joseph Smith actually saw God, and maybe he did, maybe he didn't, it's not for me to question, but if he did, then what was the point of Jesus Christ coming and dying on the cross? Because think of it this way: if this God that told Joseph Smith to rewrite the Bible, then what was the point of Jesus Christ coming and dying on the cross? Because if Jesus Christ came and died on the cross to forgive us of our sins, which basically created a new covenant, we didn't need to have another covenant from Joseph Smith. There is no point for it, because God says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Nobody comes before me or after me. I am the beginning and the end. There is nothing in there between. There's no gray area. It's black and white. You're either on this side or this side. There's nothing in between. So if Joseph Smith saw God, then there was no point to have Jesus Christ come and die on your cross for the sins. Because because Joseph Smith rewrote the Bible to his beliefs, then what was the point of having the Bible and creating the new covenant? Just a thought.
Drew and I had a lot of conversations where the Mormon reprogramming would come in, and it would sometimes turn into an argument. It was not cupcakes and rainbows conversations all the time. It was hard. There were some conversations that led to some pretty significant arguments and some pretty harsh truths were shared, and that I've learned that that's a lot about learning the gospel, is to learn those hard truths and to be okay with them, that they are going to happen, and your feelings are valid behind those, but they still happen, and they will happen. And there were some of those hard truths that were hard for him to hear too. There were several that were hard for him to hear, and some were hard for him to understand because he wasn't in it. And I had to explain to him that Mormonism wasn't a church that I went to on Sundays. It was an identity. Like when I left the Mormon church, I don't like all of Brad Wilcox's talks. I don't really like any of them. But he did say in one of them, if you leave the Mormon faith, you lose everything. And he was right. That is the one time I will give him credit that he was right on something. Because you really do.
You tell everybody who Brad Wilcox is.
Brad Wilcox is, I think he's the Young Men's president still.
No, it's not anymore.
Did he just got released then? Yeah. But he was a huge influencing youth speaker when I was younger. And then eventually he was the Young Men's general president. And then he was released, I think fairly recently, wasn't he? A few years ago, I think. But he gave a couple of pretty controversial talks fairly recently discussing some of these things. And in one of those he did say, when you leave the Mormon church, when you leave the LDS faith, you lose everything. And he was absolutely right about that. Because you do. You don't just lose a spot on a pew. You lose who you are. I lost my family. My mom has not answered a phone call in over a year. You really do. You lose everything. My sisters don't talk to me. Most recently, my oldest daughter has left our home because of our Christian beliefs and the confusion that sets in with Mormonism. You really do lose everything.
Is it worth it?
It absolutely is worth it. It absolutely is worth it. During the hard times, there's been many of times where I have thought, I can't lose this. I can't lose my kids. I can't lose my job. I can't lose, I can't lose. And God's like, watch. You will be okay. I did lose my kids. Like I said, my oldest doesn't live with me. She has made some very large adult self-destructive behaviors at 12 years old that 12-year-olds should not be making decisions on, and has decided that she doesn't want to live in our home anymore.
So where is she?
She lives with her dad. The same dad.
The abusive dad, the
abusive
Disneyland
dad.
dad.
So she lives with him right now, and he is trying to fight for full custody, saying that she was abused in our home, which is unfounded. And I have to trust God to pull us through those court cases right now. I told God I can't lose my children. And when Drew and I, shortly into our relationship together, we were trying to have kids. We still are. And I miscarried at 6 weeks old. Or at 6 weeks along. I guess not old. But I was 6 weeks along. I miscarried the day before Thanksgiving, which is my favorite holiday. And I don't know if I ever told Drew who told me this, but I called my mom and told her that I had miscarried and that I had just hung up with the doctor. And she told me that the baby was taken back to the premortal existence to be adopted into a family to be raised in the correct gospel. And that was 2 minutes after hanging up with the doctor who had confirmed the miscarriage. So, you know, I did lose my kids. I lost my family. You know, I lost my entire livelihood growing up. I didn't know who I was for a long, long, long time. And I had to tell Drew that you are dealing with 30 years of programming, and it's going to take some time to reprogram that. If you have a 30-year-old computer program, you can't just reboot it and it's going to start up in 2024. It doesn't work that way. You got to run some updates and defragging and reorganizing and everything else. My dad was a software engineer, so I know some of the lingo. You know, you've got to rewrite the language. You've got to update the hardware. It's going to take some time. And at times he would get frustrated because he didn't understand why it was so hard for me to understand. And I told him, you aren't going to understand this until I show you where it's come from. And I said, we need to go to the Church History Museum. And he was like, I don't want nothing to do with any of it. And it's like, you and I will never biblically understand each other, and we will not be able to equally yoke with each other until you see why I struggle with this. You have to go. We will never see eye to eye biblically until you see why this is so hard for me to understand. Because then, once you see where it's come from, maybe you can explain it to me in a way that I can understand. And I took him, and he walked out and was just overwhelmed.
I was angry.
And he was angry, and he was shocked. And he said,
Disgusting.
he's like, what is this? And I said, this is what I grew up in for 30 years. And it was hard. It was hard for him to understand, and it led to some very long arguments, conversations at night. Many discussions.
Is that the museum near the Salt Lake Temple?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So when you said you couldn't go to a different ward, is that they just won't let you go to a different ward?
I could attend, but they wouldn't move my records. So I couldn't participate in having a calling like I could in the congregation, in your home congregation. They refused to move my records, so I couldn't have a calling. I wouldn't have assigned visiting teachers who would come every month and check on you. I didn't have the resources in that congregation if I chose to attend a different one. So I could go and sit on Sunday at a different church, but I wouldn't have the same integration, but those who regularly attend there
So
and
you
live within.
weren't considered worthy or acceptable. If that was the case, you would be an outlier
Correct,
and a reject.
correct.
And could you get counseling from the bishop or not?
The counseling I got from the bishop was that I was provoking the arguments that led to me being abused, so I didn't particularly care for counseling from him after that.
But if you went to a different ward, you couldn't get counseling from that bishop. Is that correct?
That was my understanding at the time, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So what made you want to just read the Bible that time?
At the time, I wanted to understand it based off of historical facts. The Book of Mormon had only been around since 1820. Or
1830.
that, yeah, okay. Somewhere in there. It was around since 1830. But the Bible had been around forever. Rewritten or not, it had been around forever. It had been around for, up to thousands of years, depending on who you talk to. There have been, during my kids' homeschool, one of the things that we discuss in ancient history is that specific archaeological finds that back up things in the Bible. Such as, like, they have found an area that they believe to be the city of David. They have found certain tax creeds from the time that Jesus was born, and small things, but still things that back it up. And the church claims that there are these archaeological finds, but if you try to ask specifically what they are, they don't have anything to tell you. They come up empty-handed. Well, there's pyramids in South America. Yeah, there's pyramids in Egypt too. And so being able to find those specific things gave me some validity to at least the historical accuracy behind the Bible. So because I had that historical accuracy to it, then I wanted to see if there was any doctrinal accuracy to it as well. And that's why I clung to the Bible.
Ask Google.
Now I know I can use Google.
I had a similar experience. When you talked about this question about why did you read the Bible, what I did an experiment when I had the same kind of crisis. I would read one day from the Bible, from the New Testament, and one day from the Book of Mormon, and I just keep rotating. And I noticed every time I felt the spirit of the Bible, and I couldn't feel anything with the Book of Mormon. My whole life I looked for that.
Yeah.
I never found it. But as I read the Bible on those days, I was like, yeah, this is the truth. So I think that's important for everybody to understand. I mean, that was really set me apart. And the other thing you said was in your crisis that you said they told you went to the church and they said, eventually you will know.
Yeah.
I got that my whole life. And I'm an old man now.
Yep.
I got that till I was 50. And finally I'm like, no, it's never going to happen.
Didn't they tell you at one
Yeah.
point in time, because you were struggling financially, that you should get the money back for your groceries and to
Yeah,
pay
so
for your
at one
electricity?
point I got my tax return. And because I was young and dumb and 20 and had never lived on my own, I figured you pay the rent, all the bills are paid. I didn't know any better. And my mail was being intercepted by my ex-husband because he had a mail key. And I didn't know because the utility notice that was on my door blew off the door handle, and I found it under the stairs after my power and gas were shut off, that those are bills that you have to pay as a grown adult too. And I'd never lived on my own. I had gone from living with my parents to living with my grandparents to being married. I didn't know any different. And so when I got my tax return a couple days before the power and gas got shut off, I went and bought groceries. My daughter and I, we didn't really have groceries in the house. We had a few staples, many times we would go and eat lunch at Sam's Club because they had free samples. And we didn't have food in the fridge. And that was my creative of like, let's go hang out at Sam's Club so that she could eat. And that's how severe our situation was. So I bought groceries and filled our fridge. And then 2 days later, my power and gas got shut off, and this food is, this food's going bad in the fridge. And I called the bishop, and I said, I have this power bill. It wasn't even very much. It was only maybe $350. It wasn't a ton. But as a single mom, that's a lot. That's a lot of money. And the rent was paid. I'd paid the rent, but the power and gas equaled maybe a grand total of $600. It wasn't a ton in the eyes of a church. To a single mom, that's a lot of money. And I asked them if they could pay the power and gas bill. I didn't have any of the tax return money left, but I was working as a waitress, and I would be able to stay on top of that now that I knew it was a bill, and I turned it to paperless billing so it was on my email. Because I called the power company, and they said this is what you can do so you actually know that you have other bills to pay. So I took care of all that, and I got it on my feet to where once I got that leg up, I would be fine. I needed a one-time help, that was it. And the bishop told me that I should take the groceries back to the store, get my money back, use that to pay the power and gas bill, and then get a food order from the bishop's storehouse. And that was their answer for a one-time help for a power and gas bill for a single mom.
But yet they can go build a bunch of buildings.
Well, and their reason behind it was because I wasn't going to church. And that they usually provide financial help to regular churchgoers. So.
Anything else? Okay. Would you close us in prayer?
Sure. Father, we're so thankful for being able to be together today to fellowship and learn each other's stories and to be able to gain more clarity and closure as we continue on our journey closer to you. Please help us to travel home safely and to our various destinations. Please allow us to continue to absorb the information that we learn in fellowships such as this and any ministries and any outreach programs that are being developed or are developed. Please put your blessing hand over them that they will flourish in the Salt Lake Valley and be able to bring more to you like we have found our way to you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you.